Today I fucked up by wearing the wrong deodorant and smelling awful for years. Well, this had actually been going on for some time, but I thought I'd share it. A few years ago, when I started the 9th grade, I noticed something odd. The guy next to me was endlessly sniffling and rubbing his nose. It quickly became clear that he was smelling something awful by his reactions. I couldn't pick it up at first, but I eventually came to find out that it was me by the comments that people made, even though I couldn't smell it myself. This was odd to me as I showered and used deodorant every day without fail and even walk alone sometimes. For about a year, I didn't even know what was happening. I only knew that I smelled gross and people hated me for it. And no matter how many deodorants and body washes I switched through, or how aggressively I showered, I still smelled awful. And I didn't have health insurance at the time, so the doctor was a no-go. It was extremely strange. He eventually came to find that a new line of deodorants I had discovered actually stopped me from smelling instead of worsening my odor issue like usual. The problem was that it gave me constant chemical burns and only lasted a few hours out of a workday in the heat. But I didn't care. It worked, so I carried it everywhere and used it 4 or 5 times in a day. I eventually managed to get health insurance and went to a doctor. For the longest time, they had no idea what was going on. They ran test after test to check for any diseases or major organ problems or anything, even going so far to test for rare conditions like PATM. Also had to stop using the deodorants that worked and switch to more generic ones because the former were causing permanent scars from all of the chemical burns. Every test came back negative, which was surprising because this odor issue had been ruining my life with the social isolation that it caused, and I could have once sworn that some sort of major disease was the culprit. It was the only thing I could think of causing this major issue. Eventually, my doctor had the idea that if some deodorants worked and others didn't, maybe it was a fragrance sensitivity and I should try similarly scented deodorants. I had already gone through around 40 or so different types of deodorant by the time I saw the doctor, because I took one of each from the deodorant section and tried it, so I saw the suggestion as more or less useless. I went around and tried like 13 new types that I hadn't before and actually found one that worked without causing chemical burns or worsening my odor. It was a newly released scent from Dove. And just like that, years of suffering came to an end more or less. As it would turn out, I developed an extremely rare genetic fragrance sensitivity impacting a fraction of 1% of the entire country, and there isn't any concrete testing to figure out the issue, so it was rather hard to diagnose. Funnily enough, it's sometimes hard for me to grasp how absurd the entire thing was, and it's only now that I'm slowly picking up the pieces of a devastated social life am I seeing how far-reaching the effects of the condition was. Before I developed the issue, I thought that only the extremely unhygienic could reek so awfully to the point where their presence was intolerable. And yet there I was, reeking every day and not knowing why. Smelling bad once is a joke. Smelling bad constantly is a very serious issue. Strangers look at you in disgust and scorn as they would a rapist for you offending their senses, especially on public transport. That was the reason I got a car even though I lived in the city actually. I had been stripped of a human ability so basic that most never even think of it, the ability to work closely with other people. I simply smelled too awful due to the condition, so my presence was an extreme hindrance. I had been isolated from much of my family due to depressive episodes and a few failed suicide attempts from the condition. I find myself on the receiving end of disdain and extreme scorn that I thought was reserved for a type of person I was simply incapable of ever becoming, but that wasn't the case. Well, I guess if anything, maybe I learned empathy for other people's circumstances in a very fucked up, brutal and absolutely soul-crushing way. Too long didn't read, smelled awful for years due to extremely rare condition, but managed to end it. This is pretty eye-opening and I thank you for sharing. I used to work with a kid who smelled just god-awful every single day, and I couldn't ever bring myself to say anything because he had to know, right? He was the kindest soul and I always felt so bad wanting to tell him to go shower. Now I wonder if he had a similar situation. I am glad to hear that you've figured things out, and I'm sad to hear how drastically this affected your life. Future is bright. I'm happy you hung in there and I hope the solution sticks. Way back in 4th grade there was a new kid who smelled fucking awful. Like his family had 20 cats and the house was their litter box. It surely wasn't his fault. He cornered me one day in tears and asked me why I didn't want to be his friend. / I had a friend in school years ago with a very similar issue. She was awkward and nerdy and smelled awful despite showering daily and wearing deodorant. Most people avoided or made fun of her. Some even punched her, moved schools and lost touch with her. I think about how she is sometimes. I had a friend in high school like that. The problem was her home was bad and her clothes absorbed it. Pretty awful bullying and she was like an abused cat. Angry at the world. But I was nice to her, she was nice to me, and we've been best friends for years now. She's smelled great since moving out and having control of her life. Load the F up. Go crazy on it next time you're at the store. Brands get discontinued constantly, don't get caught off guard. So I'm confused / curious. From the deodorant reacting with my body, my bow was fairly normal otherwise. I had a similar issue growing up as well. It has made it extremely hard for me to get close to people. Over the years I've learned how to manage it better. One interesting thing is that my odor tends to ruin my shirts over time, even with regular washing. It's as if the scent gets embedded in the fabric and then the tiniest bit of sweat will activate it again. I've just accepted that these shirts die and I have to throw them out. It sucks. I periodically disinfect my armpits with rubbing alcohol once every month. That is what helps the most. Today I fucked up by leaving my wife tied up in a room with a bee. Me and my wife are into BDSM. Without going into too much detail, we were getting ready for our next session. My wife was tied to the bed and before we got started she asked me if I could open the window for a while and get some water. I, being the great husband I am, opened the window to let some air in and went to grab some water from the fridge. As I was in the kitchen my wife started screaming bloody murder. She started yelling at the top of her lungs that there was a bee in the room. I ran to the room as my wife was screaming and I saw a bee flying dangerously close to her. The thing is, my wife is allergic to bees. She has been stung once in her life and needed to be taken to the hospital. Other than that, she has been able to avoid bees just fine until this moment. I immediately sprung to action and I threw the covers on my wife to protect her. I threw myself on top of her and cut her free with the scissors we keep on our bedside table for emergency release from ropes. After my wife was no longer tied to the bed, but still partially tied up, I practically threw her out of the room, into the hallway and slammed the door shut and started battling the flying fucker who tried to kill my wife. I tried to swat the bee with a book, screaming like a little bitch with my dick out. At this point I could hear my wife laughing her ass off in the hallway as I was swatting for her life. The bee flew to the window like a dumbass and I killed it. Then I ran to my laughing wife tied up covered in a blanket and released her from the rest of the bondage. My wife told me to leave the dead bee outside on the window ledge as a warning for other bees to not get inside our house and mess with us again. TLDR, tied up my wife during our BDSM session and left for a few seconds. A bee flew into the room through the window and tried to kill her. I saved her with my heroic actions. Edit, yes, I regret killing the bee. I should have let it free, but I wasn't exactly thinking straight at the heat of the moment. It's great that people care about the bees, but I'm not going around killing bees for fun in my day-to-day life, so some of you need to calm down. Wow, talk about beatsome. Dead bees swarm in more bees that come for their rescue because they smell the pheromones. Today I fucked up by murdering a bee and getting all its gang after me. Jumping on your wife like sacrificing yourself to a bomb. Damn bro, that's heroic. I assume you got laid after you slayed the beast. Unfortunately I, the great bee slayer, had to first attach a bug net to our window to protect my wife from future harm. The bee probably heard you call your wife honey after you opened the window. Your neighbor's perspective, you hear a blood-curdling scream from your neighbor's house and you run to the window. You see your naked neighbor throwing the covers on his bed and then jump on it and cutting something with scissors. All of a sudden he picks up something covered in the covers, throw it out the door and slams the door shut. Just as you were about to call the police, you see your neighbor swatting the air with a book, screaming like a banshee having an orgasm. dick swinging and all while hearing the faint sound of laughter. Then you see him slam the window with the book, look relieved and disappear from the window. You sound like fun neighbors, not gonna lie. Today I fucked up by self-diagnosing myself with genital warts and not having sex for 3 years because of it. So this actually happened when I was about 18. One day I felt the inside of my vagina and felt bumps. For some reason I convinced myself that it couldn't possibly be anything other than warts. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone or go to the doctor, so for the next 3 years I spent countless hours googling everything there is to know about genital warts, home remedies, didn't have sex with anyone, stayed up late at night worrying myself sick about it. I felt extremely unlucky to be one of the ones who got HPV and got warts, cause apparently not everyone gets them and HPV isn't really that big of a deal. I also was terrified that I would be at risk for cervical cancer, but that wasn't enough to get checked sooner. So after 3 long years I finally built up the courage to make an appointment to get this taken care of. I called to schedule my appointment and told them that I had genital warts and that was the reason for my visit. Well, the day finally came. I felt so proud of myself for finally building up the courage to address this. Put my legs in the stirrups and the doc starts checking me. I'm so nervous and truly embarrassed for not having come in sooner and assuming that I had only grown more warts inside my vagina by not getting it treated. After she was done examining, I'm bracing myself for everything she's about to say, and she goes, "Everything looks good, we'll have your pap smear results in about a week." I couldn't believe that a doctor could make such a mistake and miss the warts. So I explained that I was there for genital warts. She then proceeded to explain to me that vaginas can feel rigid on the inside, kind of like the roof of your mouth, and that I do not in fact have warts. Too long, didn't read, self-diagnosed myself with genital warts, didn't have sex for 3 years because of it and was too embarrassed to see a drive. Finally got my vagina checked only to be told I do not have warts but that it's just my vagina and that vaginas are rigid on the inside. Edit, I am shocked at the amount of people who have been through something so similar. It's really cool to share something you feel is embarrassing and realize you're not alone. More reason to realize you're never alone in your problems. Always reach out for help and don't wait. I also schedule dress appointments and yearly checkups for just about everything. I'm also mortified by the amount of stories where people have had a scare and did actually go to the doctor immediately and were wrongly diagnosed with an STD, and it later found out it was actually nothing or something completely different. Oof, that's really rough. Another lesson learned for sure. Get a second opinion. Also, if you're nervous, scared, embarrassed about anything, trust me when I tell you dress have seen way worse, but it's actually what they are. Therefore I would be happy to private message with anyone dealing with anything similar to this and talk through things to help you get past your fears. Also, this was quite a while ago. I am now 30 years old and engaged. I've had a great sex life since. I would actually say that my sex life has been really great because of this whole situation. After finding out I was STD free, I had absolutely no insecurities about my vagina and became very open in my sexuality and very confident in the bedroom. Thank you guys for laughing, sharing your stories, relating, empathizing, and worrying about all the sex I missed out on. LOL. I'm going to have to respectfully decline all of the generous offers from those who volunteered to help me make up the lost years of sex. But that it's just my vagina. Probably one of the funniest things I've read in a while. I'm glad you ended up not having warts. Yeah, I'm a complete idiot, lol. Anyone else tongue the roof their mouth to try and compare it to a vagina? No, till that people have ridges on the roof of their mouth and it grossed me out for some reason. The roof of my mouth has always been smooth, so I took a survey of my family and it's just me. Apparently, I had a gum graft when I was really young and they took tissue from the roof of my mouth. So till I had surgery when I was an infant, all because of a post about genital warts. Lol. Honestly, I'm proud of you for finally getting yourself taken care of. It really can be terrifying and there's so much undue stigma about STIs, and I appreciate that you posted it. Maybe it'll help someone else face questions/insecurities about their sexual organs and health. There aren't enough open, honest conversations like this, and everyone really needs better information about their own bodies. Thank you. It was a rough 3 years. A big part of it was definitely being young and immature. Definitely learned my lesson. I also prohibited myself from self-diagnosing. LOL. Wow, that is rough. I have HPV, which resulted in warts, and it fucked me up for a while. They can show up 2 years after the fact, so I had no idea where I got mine from. Reached out to people in my past to let them know, and obviously let my current girlfriend know as soon as I did. Thing is, the type of HPV that causes warts doesn't cause cervical cancer, and while you don't want to let the warts hang around, once you freeze them off they don't really come back. I had the one set of 2 warts initially, and while I check myself regularly haven't seen any come back in about 8 years, so I think this is one of those STIs people overly stigmatize in their heads, but it's a treatable issue. Glad you don't have it though, and hope you enjoy fucking from here on out. Also, make sure you use protection. Yeah, even if you do have HPV, it's really not that big of a deal. Wish this was higher so that people realize their life isn't over if they have get HPV, STIs. Dude, same, this is my story. I am 17, had a wart on my finger and it came off 3 weeks ago. Mind you, I've only had serious sex once in my life. A month ago I had done some googling and found a wart that caused by an STD. I found the wart to be similar to mine, but I hadn't realized it had to be in my genital area. I told my boyfriend I did not think he should be with me anymore and practically forced him to break up with me. He didn't, but we did end up separating. Smile, I had to console myself and start accepting I was living with an STD. I was so sure I would end up alone forever. It was an actually traumatic experience. I thought life was changing for me, and at such a young age too. It was hard at first, but I finally accepted it. I had lots of questions about STDs, which I asked my aunt, she's a nurse, about. She wondered why I had such a concern for it, and I told her I think I might have one. I explained the whole wart thing and I was crying. Well, I cried later that night. She ended up buying me some acid thing to treat the wart, and now I'm happily STD free. So you thought the wart on your finger was an STD? Either way, I'm glad you got it all sorted out and can be worth free. Lol.